Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I have two objectives this morning. One is to be brief, just to prove to you that I can do it. Yeah. And two, to say some last words that would be inspiring, perhaps. Reminds me of an old preacher story. Heard about old Fred. Old Fred's not doing well. He's in the hospital. This could be it. So the family calls the preacher. Preacher comes up to the hospital room, walks up to the bed, and the closer he gets, the worse off Fred looks. And Fred looks like he needs a pencil and paper, so somebody hands him something to write with, and he scribbles a little note. And right before he finishes the last word, or as he finishes the last word, he breathes his last and he dies. And the preacher just takes a little note without reading it, sticking it in his suit pocket. A few days later at the funeral, he realizes as he's preaching that he's got Fred's last words in his pocket. And so he decides to share them with the audience. I have with me the last words Fred ever said. He pulls out the note and says on the note, "You're standing on my feeding tube." Well, if I'm going to share any famous last words that inspire, I'm going to have to borrow them from the Lord, from Jesus. Not the most famous of his last words. Those would be what he spoke from the cross. This is really ringing. Do I need to step back some? Does that help? Turn it down? How about if I stand here? Can you still hear me? The words he spoke from the cross, I guess, would be his famous last words, but I choose instead to borrow from words he spoke only to Peter in John chapter 21. I'll leave you with these words. You know the setting. Jesus has risen from the dead. He's appeared in Galilee where the disciples have gone back fishing. They're out in the boat. They fished all night. Jesus appears on the shore and says, "Hey, friends," which ought to trigger something in them. Back in John 15, just 6 chapters ago, he said, "I no longer call you servants because a servant doesn't know what his master's doing. Instead, I call you my friends, for everything my Father's made known to me, I've passed on to you." So many words he said that. So now he says, "Friends, have you any fish?" And no, they've fished all night and haven't caught anything. He says, "Put your nets on the other side of the boat." About 6 weeks ago, I was on a boat on the Sea of Galilee. I'd taken another group there, this time a group of adults. I've seen them do this illustration or this demonstration many times on one of those Galilee boats. They throw the nets off in the water just like they did in ancient times, they say. They never catch anything. Well, this time the guy threw it off on the one side of the boat, the left side of the boat, didn't catch anything, and he said, "We'll throw it off on the right side, and maybe there'll be fish there." Ha, ha, ha. It's a Jewish guy. But he's been with enough Christian tour groups that he knows the story. So he throws it off on the right side of the net, ha, 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 and pulls up 4 fish. He says he's been doing this 25 years and never caught a fish before. We caught 4 fish. Peter and his friends throw the nets off the other side, catch 153 fish. So says John. Immediately, Peter knows who it is. He puts on his coat, jumps in the water. That seems backwards to us. You would usually take your coat off to jump in the water, but he puts his coat on so he doesn't lose it, I guess, and swims to the shore, and there Jesus is fixing breakfast. And it's that moment that they have this conversation. John chapter 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." A couple of questions first, matters of interpretation. When Jesus says, "Do you love me more than these?" What does he mean, more than these? Does he mean, do you love me more than these fish? Do you love me more than you love these friends? Or do you love me more than these friends love me? I mean, I think it's probably that last one because of some bold statements Peter made before about, doesn't matter if everybody else deserts you, I will follow you all the way. I will even be ready to die for you. So I think that's the question. Do you really love me more than these other disciples love me, you think? It's really disturbing to Peter that Jesus asked him the question 3 times. You know that disturbing things come in threes in Peter's life. Remember back with the rooster that crows 3 times. He denies him 3 times, that is. You remember later on in the Cornelius story, well, back when Peter's still in Joppa, he's dreaming of food at lunchtime. That's not uncommon, I know. He's on the rooftop of the house. I always have this at my 11 o'clock class. I know if they're sleeping, they're probably dreaming of food. But on the rooftop of the house there in Joppa, he dreams he sees this blanket lowered 3 times with all the unclean food in it. Remember the original pigs in a blanket? Yeah, that's where that comes from. That's right. Now you know. 3 times it's lowered, and God says, kill and eat. And Peter says, never. I'll never do that. Well, here he asks him the question 3 times. If you read Greek, you know that there's another thing going on here, maybe. We're not sure how much to read into this or how much to give this consideration, but when Jesus asked Peter the question, do you love me? First 2 times he uses the word agape or agape. Do you agape me? We would say commitment love. Do you love me with that kind of love? And Peter answers back, well, Lord, you know that I phileo you. I have this emotional attachment, a friendship love for you. The 3rd time, as if to say, I'm coming down to meet you where you are, Peter, he says, well, do you phileo me? And Peter says, yes. Now, some scholars say you shouldn't read too much into those 2 different words because those words can be used interchangeably. I'm not sure, but either way, it doesn't matter. Jesus says, if you really love me, you'll care about sheep. Go care about sheep. I would say to all of you, go care about sheep. If you love Jesus, it's about caring for people. And I'm not just talking about the sheep that gather in your corral from Sunday to Sunday, from Wednesday night to Wednesday night. When I read back in John 10, Jesus saying, I'm the good shepherd. Among other things, in verse 16, he says, I have many sheep that are not of this sheep pen. Got to bring them in also so that there can be one shepherd with one flock. If you keep reading in John chapter 10, you get to verses 26, 27. It sure sounds to me like the sheep he's referring to aren't even what we thought of as sheep yet. They're not saved sheep yet. They're wandering around out there lost. So I think when he says to Peter, feed my sheep, I don't just think he's talking about feeding the saved. I think he's saying you need to live your life caring for people. And frankly, it's those sheep that I have a lot of concern for, the ones that are wandering around out there outside the sheep pen. To love Jesus means to care about them too, and sometimes we forget about them, don't we? Sometimes I think it would be really healthy for all of us to have at least one token lost person in every church meeting, every official church meeting. Elders, I am an elder, I can say this now. I think it would be really healthy for us to have at least one lost person in every elders meeting. We are, after all, shepherds, given the task of caring for sheep, including those lost sheep that are beyond the sheep pen. Just one. We won't let the guy vote. We don't want him to even disrupt us too much, but I think it might be good so that in case he hears us going on for hours and hours, spending so much of our time and energy trying to put out little fires, some of which we made ourselves in our own little world. Token lost man could raise his hand and say, excuse me, but what does any of that stuff you guys just spent all those hours talking about have to do with finding me? I thought you existed to find the people like me. Brothers, go home and feed some sheep. If you love Jesus, you take care of sheep. That's what you do.